but your shortcut's bound, and you press the wrong shortcut. Yeah. Now I can't see what I'm doing on Twitch because of this ad. Bear with me 1 second. Anyway, I'm going to stop being fancy and pressing shortcuts. I'm just going to press the button in OBS. What? I can't record this, Joy. Okay, so if someone could send me the VOD of this at some point, that would be grand. But let's just get started. So my name's Ryan. I'll reply to Ryan at Comrade Bubbles. I'm monitoring chat, so if you want me to see if you want me to see anything, obviously use the @Comrade Bubbles tag. Yeah, I can't record this, so go figure. So if someone could send me that at some point, that'd be grand. If not, don't worry about it. I have some show notes that I want to go through quickly. So obviously I'm a fan. I don't work for Onyx Path. They're just providing me with this platform. It's very kind of them. Thank you, guys. Oh, thank you, folks. Couple of disclaimers right off the bat. I am disabled. I'm extremely nervous right now, in case you can't tell. I flubbed the shortcut for record and everything. So my disability presents as muscle seizures and associated problems with that. I know that some people find it disquieting to see. So if I do start experiencing problems, it's fine. You don't have to, not that you could let anyone know, but you don't have to let anyone know. I've never yet, needed hospitalization for it or whatever, but just be aware that something might happen which is disquieting for you to see. If that occurs, feel free to, click away from the tab, look away, whatever. I'll try and call out when it stops. Anyone who watches more than one of these is going to hear that every time, because it's something I have to say every time that I encounter anything like this. I do also stutter because of it occasionally, because it affects the muscles in my throat and jaw. Again, sorry, there's nothing I can really do about that. It is just nerves, mostly nerves anyway. And I do struggle with multiple trains of thought occasionally, so if chat gets really busy for whatever reason, I'll try not to do it, but I might get caught in the rabbit hole of answering questions from chat and never really finish a train of thought and just go on to the next one. So again, sorry about that. Those are really the two main disclaimers I wanted to make. Obviously, I'm British. I appreciate time zones are not the best for people. Thank you for being here. Okay, so I'm going to take all my notes on Google Docs because it's the only thing I could get to record. So as the caption at the top of the screen says, it says behind the screen is GM Tips Content Creation. It's a resurrection of a previous thing of something I used to do on my stream, where that was mostly focused around D&D because that's the game I was running at the time. But broadly speaking, GM Tips obviously are applicable to a wide range of things. I think I could probably move my show notes to where I can see them on my other monitor. There we go. So, you'll notice that this document is titled Managing Expectations / Tips. First of all, we're going to go through managing expectations. I'm not perfect. I'm not the greatest gamer. I'm not the world's greatest. Okay, had to reconnect to chat. I'm not the world's greatest streamer or gamer or GM or role player in general. All I am is someone who has a lot of spare time on their hands, who thinks a lot about mechanics and how story can inform mechanics and vice versa, and how you can get different flavors of game through just different expressions of mechanics. So when I say managing expectations, that's A, managing expectations at the table, and B, managing expectations of this program. And I'll probably recap these every time anyway, but basically, as the caption says at the top, it's an open Q&A. While I'm streaming, I'll be streaming for 2 hours. So it'll be 4 p.m. BST. I think it's 11 EDT. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong on that. So if you have anything to ask, just ask. I will reply as honestly as I can. I will not lie and say I know more than I do, because I'll be caught out rather quickly if I do that. The internet is full of people who know more about certain things than I do, but there we go. So feel free to ask any questions you might have related to what I'm doing at the moment, or something I did notice when I was doing streaming on my channel for the D&D stuff, was that first time like GMs would come in and ask questions about role-playing games, and that kind of thing's okay too. Even if you're just a player, just have a question, ask. I'll try and answer it. This will be once every fortnight, which gives me a week to go through what I've created and polish it up and kind of tally up what I need to make, I guess, for the next session. So my expectations between this week and the next time I stream, for example, or as I'll need to make some player characters up as pre-gens. As you can see in the title, we'll be doing Scion goodness. I've got Origin next to me in case I need to check the rulebook, because I prefer hardcover rulebook to PDF. Well, I prefer rulebook to PDF. Mileage may vary. I know PDF's great for searching really quickly, but I just prefer books. So if I look to the side and I look like I'm picking something up, I'm probably picking up the rulebook to check something. And as I say, between now and then, I expect I need to make at least some pre-gen characters. The intention is, fingers crossed, anything that I create, and I will be asking chat for input and inspiration. I'll get onto that in a moment. Anything that I create will be, if it is eligible, will be put up on Storypath Nexus, just so that we can all see what I'm looking at. We put up, on Storypath Nexus. So I keep losing connection to the chat. Is that just me, or is there a problem with the stream? Please let me know. Anything that I create will be put up on Storypath Nexus. It will be credited as with the assistance of the Onyx Path Twitch community, or with, wording to that effect. I'm just going to use tab rather than indentations. Change your anywhere for me. You're also in Europe. Thank you. Got on the stream. It looks like time. Great. Good. I wasn't sure about the scene layout, because obviously it's just a Word document at the end of the day. So it's just my laptop refreshing the chat room for some reason. Okay. What was I? Yes, it'll be uploaded to Storypath Nexus with the usual boilerplate about content ownership and accreditation to the chat community, probably with a link to this Twitch channel in it. Because there will be points where either I can't think of something, or like I'm just glancing at chat and someone's suggesting something and it's better than what I've thought of, and that'll work its way in. I say a lot. Sorry, it's the nerves. So that will I'll try to attribute everything as best I can. With the whole thing about I can't record this, the idea originally. Yep. Still can't record it. The idea originally was to upload this to my YouTube channel a week after it airs, because subs get the exclusivity period, where... Actually, that is a point. Why is the chat not showing up? So there's a huge, obviously, black column beneath my webcam. Excellent. Thank you, Plastic Cage Place. The huge black column under my webcam should be displaying chat, and it's not. Probably, maybe because it's not my channel, although the stream key is working fine. That's something to figure out between now and next time. Anyway, so the theory was that would show you who was making the suggestions. And what do you know? Technical difficulties. No, it's definitely showing. Anyway, weird. Maybe it'll randomly work at some point. So in that case, I will try to call out whoever I see making the suggestion, just so that there is at least some accountability there. And that is something I will have to figure out for next time. I don't know how I'll figure that out, but, we'll do it live. Okay, and then really the last thing to talk about managing expectations is a bit about how I approach writing material, because it is directly informed by how I approach running games, and just the importance of managing expectations in terms of different gaming styles anyway. So, bit of background on me, I guess. I've been role playing for 9 years next month, I think. So, longer than some, not as long as most, probably. About 4 years of that actually running games. First game I ran was Promethean the Created, which was, an experience to be the first long-term game to write and run, especially with a limited time period. But that is by the by. So obviously there are a couple of different ways that people approach role-playing, and particularly GMing. We'll get the obvious one right off the bat. I don't like... I also, because I'm English, I'm going to use English punctuation. Oh, British punctuation. I don't like the term railroading. I prefer calling it guided play. But obviously this is where whoever's running the game has a very set idea of what will happen in what order, bang, 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 all the way through the story. So we'll just summarize that as rigid. That's not how you spell rigid. Also, I don't know if anyone else has tried to do anything like this on stream. It is very difficult to type while talking, while being aware of the fact that you're being watched. So, typos will happen. That is part of why I want to go back during the week I'm not doing this to polish everything up. Rigid sequential storytelling. So as I say, this is where GM has an idea. GM wants to see that idea all the way through. I'm not going to say no, because obviously it does depend on the GM, but with possibly little chance for the player characters to deviate from the set course. The kind of the obvious example of this, taken to the nth degree, are the Doths and Droids webcomic and Shemesh Young's Lord of the Rings one, where the idea is that these are universes where Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings don't exist, and the GM is trying to get the players through the plots of the respective franchises. Really good take on how players do react to railroading. I have seen, as in I have both experienced and watched online, GMs, storytellers, what have you, who prefer this kind of method, and that's fine. It's different strokes for different folks, and if it works for you, it works for you. More power to you. I firmly believe in accessibility, and I know that comfort barrier of having everything, knowing where everything is going ahead of time. Also, I know I should look at the webcam, but I don't like meeting people's eyes, and the webcam is at the moment several people's eyes. Having that safety barrier of having everything written out in advance, knowing where it's going, and not having to really do much improvisation is comforting for some people. And it does take the stress off of you as the GM to be able to be on your game all the time, to write stuff on the fly, to be able to adapt to whatever harebrained schemes that your players are taking. And that's fine. A lot of published material obviously falls into this category of game style, because it's the only way you can really write published material reasonably. So obviously any content that I create during this will more or less fall sort of into guided play. I can't remember the categories I named them the other time I spoke about this. And then other end of the scale, obviously sandbox play, as your complete open world. Players are given hooks, players go out into the world, players investigate hooks in whatever order they wish. And to some extent you can do this with pre-written material because you just provide hooks. Good example of this that I found was a couple of supplements list out kind of geographical areas and have just plot hooks for each area with suggested level values for games that use leveling progression. This is something I do on my website, which I'll be pushing at the end. But when I create an area, I generally create 5 NPCs and a plot hook related to each NPC. And it kind of works, and that's the whole point of sandbox plays. The players are free to just interact with the world however they want, to do whatever they want, to go wherever they want, and to tell the story that they want to tell. And obviously, Scion, going back to the matter at hand, Scion works really well for this because you've got the deeds. The players will tell you what they want to be doing. And I would say even running pre-written material like this is theoretically going to be if Onyx Path let me back, please do. I have a terrible, really lame sense of humor, so sorry about things like that. I will try to include some plot hooks, but obviously your players will pick up on things that I write as just incidental, or that you think are just incidental, or someone in chat suggests as incidental, and run with it. And you'll obviously have to just do the best you can. Good luck, thumbs up. And then there's kind of the what I kind of like to call it Reactive World. That's what I've started thinking of it as, but it's the middle of the road option. Not Reactive World, sorry, Reactive Story. Just put middle of the road option for now. The whole point of having these things written up is that people might join the stream all the time. So if they're written up, they can see what I'm talking about at a glance on screen. If anyone particularly wants me to, I can also add a text bar to the bottom of the screen underneath the Google Doc to say what I'm talking about at any given moment. If you think that might be useful, just let me know. I'm all about accessibility. But what I mean by Reactive Story being the middle of the road option is you have, and this is the category that I think most people fall into, but particularly this is what I use. You have a story in your mind, probably not one that you're committed to telling all the way through because things change. But you have a rough idea and you set that in motion and you give the players loads of hooks and you just work out how the story that you're trying to tell will fit in with what the players want to do. So I guess a good example would be to go back to the Promethean thing, or Scion. Actually, we'll use Scion because that's what we're talking about. So maybe, this is probably something I'm going to do as well, but maybe you give them a list of band deeds to pick from, or not to pick from, but kind of, I don't know, things that might come up, and you couch them in extremely vague and ambiguous terms, so that they're not spoilers, they don't give anything away. Something that, for this type of game in particular, something that's important is a session 0. I truly feel I didn't do it with my gaming group for my Promethean campaign, and I think it did suffer for that because one. I mean, this is the first time I'd run a long form game, and session 0 wasn't really something I'd ever encountered before. But in hindsight, and with other games I've run, the session 0 would be incredibly useful. Hey, I'm not alone. Good to know. Leashot? I don't know. But having that time set aside, even before rolling up characters, and I like that Scion especially calls out the fact that you need to do a pitch to your players and embrace the absurdity of it. Do the elevator pitch. Tell them what the campaign's about. Chronicle's about. I will use words from different systems. Should have mentioned that earlier in disclaimer, really. So I run role-playing events for a local cafe, and I have a lot of role-playing systems in my head, and I will occasionally use the wrong terminology. I do beg your forbearance with that. It's why I'm probably not going to do any Requiem material on here, because I'm running Masquerade Chronicles for them. and I don't want to get wires crossed and say the wrong thing. Although it obviously depends how long that Masquerade Chronicle runs and whatnot. I'll also try to avoid eating on stream. I shouldn't need to. I've had lunch, but, I will drink. So I'm sorry if the mic picks that up. I will try to mute for coughing. Anyway, session 0. Importance of that. By giving that pitch, by giving that selection of deeds, with the Simon example, with other games, whatever the guilty as hell of that yourself, see Aberrant streams. It's such an easy thing to fall into. It really is. Like anything. The elevator pitch, whatever information you give to the players, as long as the system supports that kind of forward planning. I know obviously some systems don't, particularly those powered by the apocalypse, but that's not this company, that's not this stream. Suffice to say they're different, and obviously not all tips will apply to different systems. But for this matter particularly, the elevator pitch and even just vague suggestions of banned deeds could be a way to indicate what kind of story you're going to be telling, in a way. Well, not in a way. It would be a way to do that. Without outright saying, this is what we're going to tell. And by leaving it to the elevator pitch, by leaving it to the banned deeds, especially because they're so vaguely written, in theory, you're not committing yourself to a story. Or you're not committing yourself to the story that you start with. Any long-time player, both on either side of the screen, and yes, it's called behind the screen for a reason. Not that I use a GM screen, but you're that side of the screen now. You can see all my notes laid bare. Will tell you that the players will just do stuff you've never thought of. They'll go places you never thought they'd even think to go. Classic example of this is one shot that one of my friends ran when I was unable to run a game. Did a 3-floor dungeon, put everything on the bottom floor. The players did 2 floors and then left. And admittedly, that's an extreme example. I also gesture a lot. You could probably see my arms moving. I'm sorry. That is an extreme example, but players will not pick up on what you think they'll pick up on, and they'll pick up on everything else. So not having that committed story is kind of important in this option. Obviously, if you're doing guided play, then that's by the by. The players will be doing that story. And as I said, that's fine. You do you. My preference, as stated, however, reactive story. So you start with your vague story, you start with your suggested banned deeds, or the words, they have gone completely out of my mind. Aspirations. There we go. Suggested aspirations. To indicate the rough kind of long-term plan that you have. Obviously, for some games, it's going to be shorter term than others. Just depends on your timescale, what your group likes, what your group doesn't like. Your average play session can impact this in all kinds of ways. So I play for 2 hours, maybe 2.5, very rarely 3, because, well, usually about 2.5, actually, I'll say, because we play in a cafe near closing time. So we have a hard limit. We can't go over that. So when I start writing scenes in a bit and, going forwards, I will definitely be thinking about material in terms of how long would it take roughly my party to complete, or my players to complete. And obviously, some groups will go through stuff faster or slower than others, but I'll try to give an estimated playtime in terms of sessions and then bracket it of 2.5 hours average. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Go back a little bit. There we go. So knowing how long your group will take to complete a story arc, let's say, will obviously impact on how much material you want /need, or pre-prepared versus prepare yourself. Good afternoon, Matthew Dawkins. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts, because my feeling with pre-written material is you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You can write too much and then risk player exhaustion. You can write too little and risk panicking people by not having enough material there. As an aside, if you aren't subbed to the Onyx Path channel, the emotes are incredible. I do love them. I dearly wish I were able to sub right now. Anyway, you can't see them if you're watching this on YouTube because of the chat box issue, but they're there. They're glorious. So with this whole writing content thing, creating content for Scion right now, anyway, I will try to emulate kind of the rough approach that was used in the... And if you haven't looked at this document, then you have no idea what I'm on about. But the most recent example I can think of is the Vampire Masquerade 5th ed starter set, where it's a collection of scenes with the salient points of each scene elaborated on, but very little extra information. And then, because, again, more into reactive story than guided play, I'll try to include some extra information that, if players do pick up on, I can provide some suggested scenes to follow up, but they won't be in as much detail. Otherwise, we'll be here all day on the same document, tinkering till the end of time. This is how I generally write material anyway. I'm not doing anything super particular for this. So the campaign I'm running at the minute, I write story beats. I write generic story beats that can take place anytime, and then just react to the player's choices to figure out how they get there. Hence, reactive bit of reactive story. Mostly because, one, I'm lazy, admittedly. I don't... Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it. Where's my mouse gone? Yeah, I'm lazy. I don't like to write too much and then have it thrown out. You are the best. You can't see, but Plastic Cage Plays in chat just gifted me a tier 1 sub. Yeah, so it is difficult finding the balance of what you will and will not use. And I'm not saying that everything that I write, if you choose to use the material, you'll use. I'm not saying that it'll cover everything your players choose to do. But it should give you a firm grounding, let's say, on the ideas of what I'm trying to get across with the material. I think that's all I really wanted to mention about different gaming styles and how I approach things. It's just being flexible, having enough flexibility in your scene structure that a scene can either take place anywhere or the players can find any way to get to that scene. And that if the players go wildly off-piste, they can still encounter what's there. It's just the idea that players are in the world, players are, having an impact on the world, even more so in Scion than in a lot of games, especially at, obviously, hero and higher tiers. But the world still turns, people still act in the world around them. The whole point, at least on surface level reading of Scion, is the Titanomachy and the Titans trying to free themselves, and that's always going to be happening in the background, no matter what the players do. There are more Titans than there are player characters. So you need that feeling that the world moves. The world turns in the background, and there is life there without the player characters, although obviously they are the focus of the game and should never really be overshadowed. There should be threat, but they should never be overshadowed. Threat of overshadowing, but they should never actually be overshadowed. They're the ones the spotlight is on. Okay, so that's a very long-winded way of explaining how I approach writing content for games and how I approach gaming. And again, if you want any clarifications, if you want to ask anything, feel free to ask. I will answer as best I can. All right, I'm just going to copy paste this list of general tips and then explain each point in turn. And then this is where everything breaks again. So these are just general gem tips. Feel like we're flexible, biggest difficulty. Feel more a storyteller gem. I'm just found myself a little anxious when I'm in the hot seat to go with the players' diversions. Some of that will come with time. Some of that will also... Hi, Lauren Shade. Thank you for commenting. I used to be very anxious about it. And then I didn't really have a paradigm shift as much as I stopped... I don't know how to explain this without sounding condescending, because I don't want to sound condescending. It's not how I feel. I have a problem with inflection. You've probably noticed by now. I've been talking for half an hour. My favourite thing to say when I'm creating material, especially world building, because that's what I spend a lot of my time doing because I have no life, is that nothing's set in stone until you describe it. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to use a lot of D&D examples because that's what I played most of recently. And obviously, that's where my memory's at. But the campaign I'm running at the minute, the players are, shall we say, eccentric. The characters, not the players. I mean, the players are all lovely people, but the characters are eccentric. And they do make questionable choices from time to time. So... Excellent. I've got a line developer's approval. That's fine by me then. So yeah, part of it is just realizing the point where what you've written or what you've created or what you want to tell doesn't work anymore. So this is admittedly, this is an incredibly extreme example, and it's something that hopefully you don't have to resort to very often. Also, if I hit the mic or the mic stand and it picks it up, I'm so sorry. I gesture a lot, I've said, and the mic is right here, you can see. I don't have room for an arm. Also, I'd hit myself in the head if I did. So this example, couple of, 18 months ago now, I think, 2 new players joined my game. It's had quite a high player turnover thinking about it. But a couple of players joined my game, and it's the first session with either of them. So obviously, they're getting to know their characters, we're getting to know their characters, and me as the GM, I'm getting to know what their characters are like in terms of expectations of puzzles, of social stuff, of not combat ability in that session, but obviously that's something you also have to be considerate about, especially where people choose to build their character, especially with a dot-based system like Scion or any most Onyx Path games. How they build their character tells you how they want their character to function. So, like, my D&D character is a bard / mastermind rogue. I want her to be social and manipulative and to help others to scheme. There we go, to scheme. These two characters, Monk and Warlock, I have no idea about. I made my partner was playing the Monk. I had some idea about backstory. I had some idea about what she wants to do with the character, but it's the first session. No one knows what's going on. No one knows their characters, all the new characters. So, indeed, thank you for the sub. So, running them through what I think is a pretty simple three-room dungeon. I mean, they're level 4 characters, I think. I think they're level 4 characters. Level 4 characters in the elemental plane of water, but that's by the by. I've done worse to them. They go through the dungeon. They have some issues with the puzzles, but up to that point, I hadn't really done many puzzles because, I'll be honest, I struggle to think of puzzles. They're one of the few things I will prepare in advance for games that require them. And get to the final room of the dungeon, penultimate room of the dungeon, and the warlock swims ahead. The warlock, bearing in mind, is a deep gnome warlock. He's like 300 years old, incredibly old. But a warlock, so I'm like, yeah, he'll probably stay at the back of the party no matter what they're doing. Lend his experience through verbal communication, Eldritch Blast everything, yada, yada, yada. No, the warlock swims ahead. And this is where I'm getting to with the hot seat bit, is I decided that corridor was trapped. There had been no traps up to this point. The only danger was drowning. The whole thing was flooded, but the players had figured out a way around that. And I decided that the corridor was trapped. And that it would do... I can't remember how much damage it would do now, but it would do some damage. They're level 4 characters. They don't have much health. It's going to be a pretty dangerous trap. And then swims on ahead and triggers this trap. Now, I don't know if you know much about warlocks in D&D or gnomes in D&D, but they don't have great strength usually. Long story short, he couldn't swim against the current. So immediately I'm reducing the damage that the trap's going to deal because I don't want to kill the character on the first session. And I do have to step in about half an hour later and say, if you don't do anything, he's going to die. So that was a whole long story to get to the point of it all is just, you have to realize that sometimes the players are going to do stuff that you can't cope with, that you do need to intervene in. That's an extreme example. A more recent example is I had to call for a break at a D&D session week before last because I just couldn't think of what to do next. They'd taken a completely left turn out of nowhere, done stuff I thought they would never consider doing. That's my fault. And when that happens, just ask for a break. 5-10 minutes to collect yourself, to think about what you wanted to do, where you wanted to go. And lost connection to chat again. Don't be afraid to hold your hands up and admit that you need some time. This works equally as well as a player. If you have a decision to make as a player, probably quite an important one if you need the time, but if you have that decision to make, admit that you need the time to think about it. If something else could happen at that time, just ask for that thing to happen or suggest it, where you take the time to think about it to process. Otherwise, you end up doing what I did in my Promethean campaign. So bearing in mind, again, it was the first campaign I'd run. I was on a time limit because it was exam period at university. I was graduating in a few months, and I had to get that chronicle wrapped up before I left, before I graduated, because I was moving to a different city. Which really, in hindsight, is the perfect storm of circumstances to not run Promethean because of how good the game is, but also how different it is in terms of themes and concept. Anyway, by the by, the player characters, the Throng, decided to not follow what I thought was a perfectly obvious plot hook. Again, very inexperienced. If I were doing that chronicle again now, I would not do it the same way. So this is a lesson to learn. I tried everything I could to get them back on track to the way that I wanted them to go. And then when I got put in the hot seat to think of something, I panicked and I was like, right, how do I get an emotional reaction? How do I convey my frustration? And this is something you should never do. You should never... I know, Yarkis, players never follow the obvious stuff. You should never, ever take your frustration out on your players for them not following your plot. Well, that's my opinion. Obviously, some people's may vary. I mentioned earlier, I don't use a GM screen because I don't like the barrier it creates. It's a collaborative experience for me. It always will be. And a screen just puts that barrier there, and I don't like it. But way back in baby GM days, I've been role-playing for just under 3 years. running a Promethean campaign with exam stress, with the looming deadline of moving city, I just kind of snapped. Like, I was visibly frustrated, and I took it out on my players. I was like, okay, how do I get an immediate emotional reaction from my players to convey how I'm feeling right now? As a friend grinding the session to hot food, like, right, do you need to ask for a break more when you need something? Definitely ask for a break. When I finish this story to demonstrate what you shouldn't do, I can think of a few resources that might help. So I was like, yeah. So I was thinking, how can I get an immediate reaction? And I knew that 3 of the people at the table were cat lovers. So, abandoned shed, overgrown back garden, sheds full of cats. And you think, yeah, what's so wrong about the cats? What was wrong about the cats? Only screen for the tables, not between players and me. Yeah, time roller. The only time I've used a screen was when I ran a short campaign of the Dragon Age role-playing game, because of just so many tables on that. Usually I print them out onto A4, and I just have them on the table in front of me, and then I've just memorized which sheet is which so I can check at a glance. I covered it as like a teaching experience. Like, there were Prometheans. They were learning about pets, about animals, about how people sometimes treat animals, and how to develop their own, feelings towards animals. And that was fine. But the frustration continued, and in a move that I sincerely regret now, the cats reappeared at the end of the chronicle in an animal testing lab, having been experimented on with having Pandoran, Azoth, whatever, injected into them, just as a way of venting my frustration. And I deeply regret that. I mean, the players got me back. They renamed my big bad something that I probably shouldn't say on stream. Suffice to say, it was a supernatural reference, and if you really want to track it down, it's what Castiel calls Lucifer. Huge advocate, take 5 minutes if you need. Story guys need breaks, players need breaks, drink water, breathe, remember the fun. Breathe. I'm not breathing, I'm talking right now. Yes, fun is paramount, and if you're frustrated by something, take a break. So, I'm assuming you know what they named my big bad Centimanus of that chronicle. Then, I mean, I thought I was being really clever calling him Peter Malian, but yeah, they came up with a different name. However, if you are afraid of grinding the session to a halt, you need a break to have time to think. If you don't play digitally, or you don't have... Okay, yeah, they called him Asp, but I wasn't sure. If you don't have the resources to do digital stuff, if you do, any story generator, any writing prompts, any character generator, just check out like fantasy location generators. Just find something that sparks your interest. If you don't have access to that, depending on what space you have and how bare bones you like things, I think it's Rory's Story Cubes. And again, I'm just a fan. I'm not shilling. I'm not being paid to sell this. This is resources I have. I think it's Rory's Story Cubes. They're just dice. They're 6-sided dice, but instead of the pips, each dice has a picture on it. The idea is it's a kid's game. You're supposed to roll them. You make a story part of them, but they're good for generating idea prompts on the fly. If you like something a bit more wordy and concrete, Storyforge cards. They're tarot sized. I don't know if you can still get them. I presume you can. I've had my deck for years. They're tarot sized, and they're split into 4 different categories. I can't remember what any of them are, but they have archetypes, ideas, concepts on them, and their top half of the card's always a positive aspect of that thing. Bottom half of the card is the negative aspect of that thing. So if you want a negative thing, you draw the card, you figure out which is the more negative, you get the picture. So if you're worried about grinding a session to a halt and you need something really quickly, do that. 1 sec, I just need to rehydrate. Yeah, Aurora Story Cubes. Excellent. Thank you for confirming. They're a great resource and a good way to spend the time. Other resources to help with that kind of thing, if you don't want to take a break. Something I did recently was just get a deck of cards with great art, or either tarot, oracle. I used the Tarocca deck from the D&D Curse of Strahd campaign. Anything with great art or evocative art, the greater evocative card names. Heck, maybe use a geography randomizer. There's a Where Am I game you can play on Google Maps or something. Anything that gives you just something that could be in the immediate environment. I spent trying a stage game at Roll20, signed to you when I go to the groups, going to run an altered version. I like some information to players in person. So I play both over Roll20 and in person. Obviously, if you're using a computer already, you can access a wealth of digital resources. Sorry. Going back to what I was saying about generating on the fly. So that's all good for stuff that's generating on the fly if you really are worried about grinding the session to a halt. If you have the time and you feel comfortable asking for a break, this kind of leads into read a lot of stuff. But my usual fallback is to think about any situation I've encountered in fiction and non-fiction, in other game lines, in other games, that could be roughly analogous. So, again, the decision recently where the players took a left turn, they did stuff I hadn't expected them to do. So, it's my own fault. They committed regicide and then sacrificed a prisoner they had to open a portal to the truth of everything, which was the void. As playing D&D, it was the far realm, and then I realized I backed myself into a corner, and the heck do you do when they're in the far realm? It is by its very nature unknowable. So rather than doing what I did with the Promethean campaign and being like, you've annoyed me, you've done something I hadn't planned for, I'm going to get myself back at you, so I'm going to reject all the choices you've made up until now. I'm going to kick you out of the far realm. You're going to be where I want you to be. You're going to do what I want you to do, because you should never do that. Player choice is important. Certainly at my table, I want players to feel they have stakes in the story, to feel that they at least are directing most of it, and not just reacting to what I'm doing. So I asked for a breather. Obviously, on Roll20, you can do this easily just by muting yourself, by stopping your feed, whatever. Just say that you need a break, and then do it. Unlike with Roll20, I wasn't at a computer. This is an in-person game. I didn't have any of my resources with me apart from what was at the cafe. So I was kind of panicking a little bit. Less than I was panicking for this stream, but I was panicking a little bit. And then I realized that there is a place that can connect to the far realm. City of Doors, Sigil, which is a hard G. And so the game was back on track. I took a 5-minute break to think through what could possibly happen in Sigil, and continued. And then the game progressed, they enjoyed it, and we all told a cool story. And again, don't do the cats in the shed, which I think might have to be a metaphor for every poor role-playing game decision I've ever made. Also, an emergency bathroom study session. I'm doing awesome. Job to listen to and great insights. Thank you. I'll tell the same stories over and over again because I do not get out much. An emergency bathroom study session. Yes. Oh, I read a game that suggests doing that very thing, just going for a bathroom break. I can't remember what it was. That's annoying. But these are my general tips nicely. So thank you, Time Roller. So, general tips. Read a lot of stuff. This is a truism anyway. I firmly believe in the power of reading. Sorry. Just need to check something. Cool. Well, not cool. It's bad news, but, you know. Read a lot of stuff. Just, if you're going to be role-playing for any length of time, just read. Get a grasp of character. Get a grasp of theme, setting, ideas, behavior. It doesn't have to be fiction, non-fiction, psychology, history, whatever floats your boat. Read it and read the heck out of it. I read everything. I'm completely unashamed of my nerdery. I will ask for books on any number of topics for like when people ask me what I want for my birthday or Christmas. This is how I read Other Minds, which if you haven't read Other Minds by Peter Godfrey Smith, it is a fascinating look at undersea life and specifically cephalopods and the evolution of intelligent life on a non-bipedal model. And boy howdy, does knowing stuff like that help me tell better stories. You wouldn't think it does, but it does, because players do what players do. And you need to invent stuff on the fly, and you're like, I know this random bit of trivia, and I can build something around it, and we can all learn stuff along the way. So when people ask writers, how do you get to be a good writer? It's invariably you write and you read. Other order usually, actually. You read and then you write. But my point still stands. Read a lot of stuff. Obviously, if you're not into reading, watch stuff. Doesn't have to be documentaries. Watch anything. Get a feel for story beats, for story planning, for characters. You can probably tell what interests me most about role-playing. It's story. But if you like documentaries, watch documentaries. Learn something. Whatever you sit down to read, to watch, heck, even play video games. There's advice you don't hear very often. Play them. Play the heck out of them. Learn them inside and out. I play a lot of BioWare games and role-playing games in general, and just story beats and character ideas come from those all over the place, and you can always make them your own. Don't feel worried about copying other things. I'll talk about that surely in a bit. Whatever you do, whatever you read, play, watch, listen to, just take something away from it. Even if it's just, I liked this about this story, but I didn't like this about this character. You're not going to... I have this thing about stagnation. I hate the idea of stagnating and never progressing forwards, never moving on, never getting better at anything. That's just me. I know some people are at the top of their game and they're happy to be there. Or equally, part of my thing is I'm terrified of success. I'll be completely open and honest about that because mental health should be visible, but it still stands. I'm terrified of success. That's why I was so scared about doing something like this. I've never done it before to more than like 2 people. And I've never done it to people I don't really know before. But here we are. My fear of stagnation outweighed my fear of success. Mental health, just so that we're on the same page, is an important topic to me, and it probably will come up in terms of content generation, even if it's just a character with mental health problems. It's why I have yet to run or play Long-Term Changeling, because it kind of, I love it, but it cuts a bit too close to home. Not that I'm an abuse survivor. Unfortunately, I'm not. I know people who do, and they need support and awareness and everything, but mental health, very important to me. I'll talk about it a lot, so sorry. Anyway, because if you're not reading, if you're not playing, if you're not watching, whatever, if you're not taking anything away from the media that you're consuming, there's no point in you consuming it apart from shallow entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with shallow entertainment, don't get me wrong. Immediately after doing this, I'm going to go and relax by doing shallow entertainment. I'm going to read something and probably not pay attention to what I'm reading. But that's the joy of comics. You don't have to pay attention to what you're reading. I agree that NPC villain you're most proud of from recent game ended up watching like 8 specials and documentaries and did quite a bit of reading to come up with the backstory and details of their life. Excellent. And that's great. And it's a great feeling when you're like, I have this character and they're a real person because they have real solid grounding. Same issue running Wraith. Oh my, I have not even tangled with Wraith because of how opaque it is. Certainly to me, anyway. Yeah, taking stuff away from what you're consuming. Media is everywhere. And seriously, use the recommended media lists in the rule books. They're incredibly useful. But it's everywhere. We consume it every waking moment of the day, whether we mean to or not. Advertising copy. If you like something about an advert, remember it. Even if it's just the shades they use. Because then that's a visual reference that you can give your players as a description. Not, obviously, say the blonde have that woman's hair in the advert, but it gives you a metaphor, it gives you a simile to use. Heck, just the world around you. Keep your eyes open, observe, listen, smell, taste, hear. No, I've said that already. Feel, there we go. That's the fifth sense. Everything and anything can be fodder for evocative description for character. I've been told by my players that I'm good at believable characters, and that's entirely because I read so much. I have an okay grasp of character archetypes, and I am 100% not afraid to steal a character I know from fiction, from history, whatever. Something that I tell a lot of people when they ask, especially new players or new GMs, like, what do I do when I make a mistake? How do I cope with that? And I cannot stress this enough, but the players don't know it's a mistake until you tell them it's a mistake. They can't see they don't know what you're planning. They don't know that this hasn't been worked out in advance. And unless you tell them, they'll never know. I do this a lot with visual description. So I have the thing that some people have where I don't really have a mind's eye. I don't see things especially well. If I focus, I can maybe do it. I can do nets quite easily. I can rotate objects, but I can't picture scenes or people. Like I can't remember I can't remember the visual stimulus of faces, but I recognize faces really easily. So visual description for me suffers, and I know that's a weakness, and I make people aware of that. But when mistakes do happen, because they are bound to happen, I'm human. By the time I run that game on a Monday evening, I've gone through the entirety of Monday. I've probably done a stream. I'm probably tired. And I can eat all the cake in that cafe because they make homemade cake and it's delicious. But I can eat all the cake in that cafe and that sugar is not going to do one jot towards my visual description. Own your mistakes. You don't have to tell the players that you've made a mistake. I didn't when I did so recently. What I did was I realized I made the mistake afterwards and I went, okay, how does that factor into the story? And this is, again, where reading a lot of stuff comes into it because it gives you a wealth of pre-written material. Sure, it might not be for this purpose, but it gives you a wealth of pre-written material you can draw upon. And I think if you're going to take away one thing from any of this, really, and I've still got now, but if you're going to take away anything from one thing from any of this, it's cheat. Cheat and steal. Make it your own, obviously. Don't just pass it off as your completely original material. Hence the boilerplate I'm going to include in the video descriptions and any content I create. Because I'm not doing this in a vacuum, but your players can't expect you to create in a vacuum, especially doing what players do and going completely off the beaten path. But it's that oft-repeated saying that everything's already been written. There are no original plots. And it's true, there probably aren't. Like, there are no original characters anymore. Because if you read enough, you'll find a character that is the person you were thinking of. It's just important to make them your own. So, I guess a sort of example of this, because I too am, theory, practice. My D&D character, my Bard Rogue, started out roughly analogous to quote from the Kingkiller Chronicles, except less wizard, more spy. That was very bare bones session 1. She had 2 paragraphs of backstory, and she's evolved over the 2 years we've been playing into someone completely different. and mostly original. I mean, there are still going to be aspects of other characters here and there that kind of bleed through. It's the problem with having so many characters in your head. But make them your own. That's really the purpose of reading a lot of stuff. It helps you to make things on the fly, and helps you to make characters believable. It also helps with description, but that's by the by. I'm not the greatest at giving advice on description. Point 2 of my general tips. I was going to do the clapping thing, but I was going to clap the mic stand, but you can't see it. Read a lot of rules. Seriously, read them. You might not like reading rule books, but read them. I have read quite a few rule books in the 9 years I've been role-playing. Don't usually like too complex personalities these days, since that usually involves a lot during play. Exactly, Arceus. My NPCs, if I need them on the fly, like I have a split second of race, name, and ambition. Like, what do they want? What do they want to get out of this scene? And usually it's just to sell stuff. But then it's kind of like, how do they sell that stuff to the player characters? And my approach to doing personalities for, I guess, SGCs, or NPCs, if you're watching this in the context of not Scion, obviously will be explored through me writing, but give them a name. This would be less applicable to Scion, but give them a race for fantasy races, sci-fi games, whatever. And then give them an adjective. So one of my players' favourite NPCs was a trusting half-orc. That's all I gave him. His name is Garth. He's a merchant. He's a trusting half-orc. And they love him. And we've had great scenes with Garth, but that's all his personality was when I started. Same with player characters. Admittedly, when I'm playing a character, I usually go for more than just one adjective. I like to give the impression of being rounded, but same situation applies. They're not complex in any way. They're extremely surface level. And then it's just learn through play, develop through play, allow what happens at the table to inform character. That's how alignment shifts happen. Anyway, reading a lot of rules. Yes. Even if you don't think... So, and as an example, my partner loves D&D, will never play Call of Cthulhu. She is intrigued by Changeling and Promethean, will never play World of Dark, the Core Chronicles of Darkness. She doesn't like horror games. But she's fine when horror makes its way into those games. And that's what reading a lot of rulebooks helps with. If you know how other games portray a certain genre or idea, this is also something that admittedly might not be easy. It might not come naturally to you. It might not be obvious straight off the bat. But if you know how they do it, you can convert it into your game of choice. So obviously we're fortunate with Scion and Storypath system in that it's still quite similar to Chronicles of Darkness. So if I want horror to appear in Scion, I'll look at how that all works. And obviously, in a lot of horror role-playing, actually, the horror comes from the fact that you can't do... Well, you can do something. You can't do much against the unknown. Call of Cthulhu is the obvious example. If you're fighting the big bad... If you're fighting the little bad, you're probably going to die. You don't have much health. It's probably got way more health than you can output damage, and death and injury are serious consequences that are quite likely. So you don't want to go running headlong into danger. And that's where the horror comes from, fragility of human existence. Obviously, in Scion, depending on your tier, you're doing slightly different things, especially with scale involved. Whereas at Origin, the haunted house might be haunted because there's a ghost. In Hero, the haunted house might be haunted because the house is possessed itself. Even going further, at Demigod, it'd be an Axis Mundi to an underworld god. Heck, the house might be a doorway to a primordial. Who knows? Whatever. Those books aren't out yet. I can't talk about what I can... Well, I can theorize what's going to be in them, obviously. But knowing how other games do what you want to do in your game will help. Obviously, each game is more or less suited to genres, so Silent is clearly an urban fantasy game. It outright states it is. And that when you are capable of doing what sounds are capable of doing... Sorry, I'm looking at the book. That's why I keep looking over here. When you're capable of doing what sounds are capable of doing, that threat to mortal life, the fragility of existence, that horror isn't necessarily there. So you're going to more be relying on evocative descriptions and horrific situations. At origin level, I just punched my mic. At origin level, it's not that bad because mostly mortal. Let's be honest. It's the whole point of origin. So there is the threat there. But at hero, it's obviously going to depend on you. It's going to depend on your players, and it's going to depend on what both of you are comfortable with. I asked my players what they aren't comfortable with in terms of horror. So one of my players doesn't like clowns. One of my players doesn't like zombies. One of my players doesn't like needles. I found what they didn't like, so I knew what I could use. And then I doubled down on all that stuff. There's no point going too far. Yes, I will use clowns and needles and zombies if I have to make a point, but it'll be to unsettle, to disturb. It won't be to horrify. That is not the experience we're having at the table. And this is going down a bit further, but we'll get there eventually. Take what works in one game, figure out how that would work in your game, and go with it. Obviously, it's not going to be a one-to-one in most cases, but in a lot of cases, you can get at least the right feeling. And again, this is something that requires a lot of thought about internal game mechanics and how they represent certain things. And there's a lot of reading you can do on the subject to get not better. I've just noticed a stray period. Not better at it, but to get more open to it, let's say. It's something I do want to do in the content I create here. So I'll obviously talk through how I approach that when it becomes relevant. Tip number 3, be open with your players when changing rules / gameplay experience. You know what? Let's actually move these around. Let's put this as tip number 3. Make sure everyone is on the right page. I will correct that to say same page. There we go. Make sure everyone's on the same page. So this is going back to the idea of session 0. There was a story I read on Twitter last night. Odds are some of you probably read it as well. Grimdark GM wants to tell Grimdark games. Players don't want to. Players gang up on GM and ruin his plans. It's not a great group dynamic. It's not a good it's not a good table dynamic. And it sucks. One of the points of a session 0 is to manage the expectations of the players, to get everyone on the same page about what the game is going to be about. And again, this is going back to giving them the elevator pitch, the deeds, aspirations if you're playing Chronicles of Darkness, etc., etc. Once everyone is on the same page, you can progress. Going from personal experience, having been on both sides of this as both player and GM, having one expectation for a game and being met with another thing, it sucks. It is one of the worst feelings I've ever experienced. Again, from both sides of the screen, from both ends of the table. Really wish I knew why I kept disconnecting from chat. Anyway, I guess I could just pop it out. Who knows? So it's not that. It's not that you're going to be on the same page all the time, because people are going to draw different conclusions from different things. And going back to that truism, players will do what players do. They will just go off on tangents that you've never considered based on their personal expectations. But making sure that everyone starts out at the same point so that everyone knows the experience that you're going for is incredibly important, and just for fun more than anything. A table that isn't having fun, you can tell. If you've never been in that situation, you're fortunate, but you can tell when a table is not having fun together. Unfortunately, my first main role-playing experience was this very thing. I did some one-shots, that was fine. I was invited to a home game. That was its own thing that I'm not going to talk about here, but I didn't fit with the rest of them. I was not having the experience that they thought that they expect me to have, in a way. I mean, if anyone particularly wants to know, obviously I will expound on how those factors came together, but it was extremely disheartening. And when we broke for Christmas and I was never invited back, it was kind of a, yeah, sure, whatever, I don't care. That was possibly the best way out of it for me, was just to not go back and to have their tacit approval not to, because I invited someone else to the game. That was, as I said, that was the best solution. I mean, sure, it sucked. It felt terrible. We're kind of wondering, was it something I did? Was it because I was the new player? Did I mess up all the time? Did I worsen their experience? And it was just, with the benefit of hindsight, and I've been thinking about this for years because anxiety, chewing that nugget over and over again. With the benefit of hindsight and knowing what I know about role-playing games now and about how to run role-playing games and about how I like to play, we just weren't that compatible as players. We did fine in one-shots because they're one-shots, and you get a pre-gen, usually you get a pre-gen, and you sit down. By their very nature, they're more guided. You play through the story, and you're done. Completely different in campaigns, obviously. And I think I've lost connection to chat again. Joy. So that was a learning lesson. Always be aware of that, I guess. If you feel that something is wrong at the table, maybe it's because everyone has different expectations about the game. These three, this point and the two following do kind of flow into each other, but as long as everyone has the same, as long as everyone's got rule for the same idea of what's going on with the game, you should be good. So if you do change rules or the gameplay experience, please tell your players. Please don't. Hello, Neon Deflector. I'm waxing lyrical. Please tell your players when you change stuff. A big attraction of role-playing games is the fact a lot of rulebooks say if a rule doesn't work for you, throw it out. And you can do that. And it's great because you're encouraged to. Not every rule works for everyone. Scion as an example. Alternate rules for momentum generation. They'll work better for some groups than they do for others, but that's why they're there. Also, it's just great that they're included. I wish it was my name. My name is Comrade Bubbles. I now feel like waxing lyrical should have been what I went with all those years ago. Someone else can take that name. Enjoy it. Just credit me appropriately. Anyway, Rule 0. If it's not fun, change it. I think that's Rule 0. Yeah, it's usually one of those rules, or the golden rule, or whatever. But if you change something, tell your players. One, it's just rude not to, because again, you're changing the gameplay experience, you're altering your expectations, you're putting yourself, if you're the GM doing it, you're putting yourself above them by knowing something that they don't know. Also, of course, when doing this, sometimes you'll make a mistake. It won't work as well as you hope it will. You can be the best GM in the world and still make mistakes. That is my firm belief. Everyone is fallible. And if you make a mistake and it's something that isn't part of the gameplay experience, 100% own up to it, because that could put that player off the game. I realized this quite recently, to go back to my D&D campaign, because this is where I do a lot of practicing what I preach. Hopefully soon it'll be, Onyx Path goodness, but that's by the by. I wanted a way to simulate a haunted house. I mean, this would work equally with Onyx Path, actually, because you just assign mental dots and give a second defense value. Anyway, data, you can make all the correct moves and still lose. That's called life. Exactly. That is an incredibly accurate quote in a lot of things. Thank you, Neon Deflector. Again, for those of you who've been here from the start, for those of you who haven't, the big black void underneath my webcam should be showing chat. It's something I'll have to figure out why it's not. It might just be because I'm not on my usual channel and I have to refresh the cache or something, but I didn't want to break the stream. So, Neon Deflector in chat just quoted Picard for those of you who may be watching this on YouTube. Who knows? Yeah, so let's do a thought experiment then. So, what I did was to simulate a haunted house. We played a game of Betrayal at House on the Hill. I gave everyone a discrete movement value based on race and class. So you just probably use speed. I'm getting character sheets messed up in my brain, so I'm just going to actually consult the character sheet. So, yeah, there we go. So if we were to do it for Scion, this haunted house. So for those of you who don't know what Betrayal at House on the Hill is, indeed, thank you, Mizari. For those of you who don't know what Betrayal at House on the Hill is, Betrayal at House on the Hill is a board game. It's procedurally generated in that every time you move, you lay down a tile of the house. Has a whole selection of decks associated with it. Most tiles draw a card from one of the 3 decks. When certain conditions are fulfilled, what's known as the haunt happens, and at that point, the game, which is cooperative and has no lost state. Once the haunt happens, the game become one player, most of the time, because in the base game there are 50 scenarios. In most scenarios, one player becomes the traitor, hence Betrayal at House on the Hill. The game has a lost state and everyone can die, and then the traitor and survivors both get win-loss conditions. It's a fantastic game. It's a great way to spend a few hours. I keep moving my hand and panicking that I've muted the mic, because my mic has a mute light that flashes when it's on. And anyway, I keep catching a light beam. So if I panic and look down, that's why. So in D&D, I represented that as gave them a move speed based on race class. I dealt with the card draws. I read the cards. Good, I haven't muted. I read the cards and then passed them how I would describe them as, in D&D. So for Scion, probably give them a speed based on the dexterity. Excellent. Yeah, I have a very small stream, so I used to mute every time I drank, and then one time I forgot to unmute after drinking, and there was no one in chat to tell me, so for 2 minutes it was all quiet, and then someone joined and was like, I can't hear you. I was like, oh, great. Yeah, so I might assign a speed based on dexterity and athletics, probably. This is all obviously just off the top of my head, how I would pass this in Scion. So that's fine. You move the number of tiles until you draw a card, yada yada. If you really want to know how to play it, there's tabletop. There's probably other videos on how to play it, but there we go. So Scion, you'd have a speed based on dexterity and athletics. The cards I'd pass the same way. I would draw them as the story guide. I would read them. I would interpret them as put them into a format that works with the Scion engine, story paths, and then give you the options. So what I did was I gave everyone in D&D, I gave everyone a health track for physical health, which was their normal hit points, and I gave them a health track based on their charisma modifier. So in Scion, it would be you keep the same health squares, but if your composure is high, you get extra ones, I guess, or resolve. Yeah, you just use resistance, whichever is the most applicable resistance, really, to generate how much health you have. Obviously, in D&D, you have more health than you have in Scion, where you have the character sheet has space for 5 boxes, but obviously you can get more. So when damage occurred in the game, I had the players roll the dice that come with the game to determine how much D10 damage they took, and then applied that amount of damage. And that was really it. Good results. I granted them either advantage on a roll, or, so players who don't play D&D, roll 2d20 to pick the highest, or temporary hit points. But, and this is where being open with it and owning your mistakes comes into play. It didn't add anything to the game in any way. It overcomplicated matters. If I were to go back and do it again, like if I were to do it with Scion, you just keep your health conditions as they are. Maybe you get one extra if you're particularly high, if you have a particularly high resolve score. Maybe. Or maybe roll for it, get 1 if you get any successes. Or maybe it would just be an enhancement. Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe it would be an enhancement to certain checks, tests. And just keep the character sheet as it is. I would just keep the character sheet as it is. Just think of things in a different way. So the main drawback of the way that I handled it was it added a lot of bookkeeping to the game. Role-playing games, as anyone will tell you who has played for a long time, or even a short time, because you can't play for a short time. Going with my next point is that role-playing games take a long time to do anything in. Which seems paradoxical, because you can travel the world in a sentence, but character development takes a long time. Parsing character decisions takes a long time. Making decisions takes, comparatively speaking, a long time. Unless you've been playing the same character day in, day out for, years and they're a second skin. Even I still have to admit that I need time to think about what my characters would do. So adding the extra level of complexity to the game by having a second health pool, adding health where it wasn't needed to be added because nothing in the game was really doing that damage, and fiddling with checks just didn't add anything to the game. And I admitted that. I told my players that, I was going to do this thing, it was going to be an experiment, and we'd see how well it worked. And it worked pretty well. They enjoyed it. There were other problems I had with it that were more down to how I was parsing the mechanics of the game within the narrative that we were creating. But that was, that's by the by. Ultimately, recap at this point. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Own your mistakes. You're looking at ways to integrate works in other systems, even means like board games, tabletop RPGs. Yes, exactly. That was, I work at a board game cafe, and there's a whole wall of 400 plus board games. Of course I'm going to start using them at some point. I would dearly love to use Mastermind as some sort of magical lock, but my players would kill me. So, there's that. I would use Jenga, but my aforementioned disability is kind of aggravated and set off by sudden loud noises. And the cafe has Jenga, has Buckaroo, Pop-Up Pirate, loads of dexterity stacking games that I can think of ways to put them in the game, but I just can't because it'll worsen my experience. But definitely. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful when you do integrate. Obviously, Mr. Line Developer, you know this already, but be careful when you do. And if you make mistakes, own up to it. And don't be afraid to change. Don't do it willy-nilly, whimsically, if you're not familiar with the willy-nilly phrase. don't be afraid to change things if it isn't contributing to the fun on the table. In hindsight, I should have scrapped the whole secondary health pool within 2 instances of it being a problem and just gone to keep your health, we'll deal with that. But there we go. Live and learn. That's why I'm here, expanding on my mistakes so that you can learn from them. And why I'm encouraging you to ask questions and comment with your own experiences, because we can all learn together. Leading nicely to keep dialogue going. As story guide, storyteller, keeper, GM, DM, MC, whatever, insert relevant game title. I could use something like a mousepad or something to offset the noise trigger for Jenga. Ooh, I could actually, yes, if it were big enough. We do have a neoprene mat, actually. Thank you for that idea. If it comes to it, I might just use that. So your interpretive dance RPG is out. Heck no! Own that! Do it! You just might not get many players. Although if you did, I would at least be interested in seeing how it works. Pretty large mousepads? There are, but it's a standard sized Jenga set and they fall all over the place. Fortunately, because it's a public environment, and this isn't really a general tip, but something to consider. I want videos of this as well. This is something to consider. It's not really a tip as much, but more common sense. But be aware of the environment you play in. It's not such a big deal on Roll20, obviously, but for in-person games, your environment can impact the game quite a lot. So I play in home games. I occasionally run a home game or 2, but my campaign, as I've mentioned, and the events I run take place in a cafe. It's a board game cafe. It's a great place. Obviously, they pay me to run events, so of course it's great. But a cafe environment, a public place, is a lot different from, I'll say, the quiet of your own house. But obviously, if you share a house, it might not be that quiet. But being in a cafe surrounded by people eating, drinking, playing their own games, having their own conversations, you have to make concessions. And so I have games much like Scion and the other Chronicles of Darkness games. I have games where they don't use gridded combat, for example, and D&D doesn't ordinarily have gridded combat. Well, it suggests that you don't, but you can. I have to use minis. I have to use a battle mat because stuff gets lost in translation. So being aware of your environment and knowing what problems are going to occur in it and what solutions you could potentially have to those problems is very important. So, like the suggestion in chat from Plastic Cage Plays, use a mat for Jenga to avoid my trigger. That's great. I don't know why I never thought of that, but luckily we have a neoprene battle mat that was ordered by mistake. Also, I'm intrigued. I would like to also see a Neon Deflector, so get on that. You've got 2 weeks until I'm here next. I expect progress. I don't expect progress. Please don't take that as an order. Yes, rewinding. Keeping a dialogue going. As story guide, etc., etc., etc. Said all that. Obviously, you have to have a lot of information in your head. You really do. And you can get around that in a few ways, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But you need NPCs, you need world state, you need ambitions of everything. You need to have a rough idea of your characters and where they're going and where the players want them to go. If I get homework, you get homework. You need to be thinking constantly, well, not constantly, but mostly constantly, about where the story's going next, what you could do in response to the players. And this is why I advocate for extremely basic rules like prep, because just less to think about. But I know some people don't like that. I think it was work in the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects them. Indeed, I believe it was Matt Mercer. He of Critical Role fame and quite a few video games and anime. He doesn't like improving NPCs. He does lots of material for them, and that works for him. I generally don't. So I'll okay. Yeah, it's behind the screen. I'm being honest. Everything on show. Used to do that. That worsened my skills as a GM because I was so terrified of not getting what I myself had written correct. The players would never have known I got it wrong. That's, they don't know it's a mistake until you tell them. They would never have known that I'd got it wrong. And still it terrified me. I felt I had to stick to everything I had written. I wrote a fake history essay before I started this campaign. And the players haven't read it. And do I feel like it was wasted? No. It was a good experience. It got me thinking about the world in perhaps more detail than I should have done. But it allowed me to lay the bare bones for stuff. For like culture and architecture and civilization, that kind of thing. It was only 3 pages long, one of which was just a timeline. But it helped me feel that I had a grasp on everything. And yes, I need everything, otherwise it'll fall apart. Everything needs to be sort of prepared, but in broad strokes. I don't do fine detail until it's needed. Because in the play, because something I've learned, something I enjoy doing from quite a few games, is turn questions back on players. When they ask you something about the world, and it's not defined, or you can't remember, or you can't think of it, ask the player. This is exactly how my players ended up committing regicide and ending up in the far realm of Sigil, is because I asked the players who they worshipped, and one of them said Cthulhu. I was like, oh, okay, the Church of the City is Cthulhu. Cool. We'll go with this route. Yay. All those high-plan NPCs and encyclopedias don't even know what they think they know. Exactly. That is the only thing that you can ever say, really. How would an NPC know about what's going on in 2 countries away unless they have access to a 24-hour news service? But you have all of that stuff in your head. Now, you aren't telepathic. You don't know what your players are thinking. You don't know what they're picking up on. It's like, I wrote that entire history thing. They haven't read it. Keep talking to your players. Find out what they like and what they don't like. There's no point writing something that your players aren't enjoying. There's no point devoting energy into something that they aren't enjoying. If you do, you've got 2 choices. One is stop. 2 is find new players. And I promise you, one of those is way easier than the other. Way easier. Especially if they're your friends. Obviously, if it's the start of a new campaign and it's just not working out, then that's a harsh decision to make, and a conversation must be had. And that's the point of keeping a dialogue going. Talk to your players, find out what they like, find out what they don't like. Going back to the reactive story thing. If you know what kind of story beat they like, you can make that kind of story beat happen. I don't know if it's going to happen yet still. One of my players wanted to be a werebear. I was like, okay, that's a cool idea. I'll figure that in somehow. And that's an idea I would never have had. So I then had to figure out how to introduce the concept of werebears and then figure out where that could potentially happen. WHERE for where, not, as in where that. Yeah. Anyway, that's the nerves and trying to make a joke out of nothing that's not there. Something that's not there, something that's not funny. Or even better than that, going back, you can't force chemistry, and that is the sad fact. Going back way to keeping everyone on the same page and session 0. Sure, you've got your elevator pitch, you've written it, you've got your suggested band deeds, and you've got your aspirations if you're playing other Honest Path games, whatever they are in Pugmire and Scarred Lands and Aberrant and Trinity or whatever. Anything that gives you a clue towards future progression. Let's put it that way. We're fortunate in Onyx Path games that a lot of them do include things for the players to choose, like in Scion, short and not long-term deeds, aspirations in other games, etc., etc. Some games don't have that, and this is primarily just, system agnostic tips. If your players aren't telling you what they want to do with their characters, ask them. I ask for feedback a lot from my players. One, again, anxiety. But two, just so I can improve, just so I can tell the story that they want to tell, or so that we can tell the story they want to tell, I should say. Again, we're lucky in that a lot of the games that will be on this channel have that baked in. Just knowing what their deeds are, even if it's just the adoption and failure deeds. You know that character wants to make a specific change from state A to state B. And it's your job to facilitate that. They're saying, hey, story guide, I want to do a thing. Not just anything. I want to do this thing in particular. Don't ignore that. Seriously. I mean, it seems common sense, and it seems like I'm, repeating what is obvious, but just don't ignore it. It's even more, I'd say slightly more important in games like Promethean, where there is a defined end state. And obviously in Promethean, so for those of you who don't know, it is a bit of a weird one. Promethean the Created, you play as artificial beings who are aiming to become human. And you do this by following a couple of philosophers throughout your character's gameplay life, doing certain things in each philosophy to reach that state. You refine the eternal fire to become, to reach a state where you can possibly become human. And that's kind of a very definite, I want to do this, and this. And that's how I want to reach humanity. And going back to my Promethean Chronicle, I didn't really pay attention to that. I had an idea in my head about what would happen, which was very bare bones. It was Kent Manus using a small hadron collider. Don't ask me where that came from. Under the university to make a new kind of, to make a new lineage, a new kind of Promethean. I was like, yeah, this is a cool story. Players will love it. They liked it. They said they liked it anyway. But it wasn't fulfilling. I mean, I guess that's the point of games that have goals baked in on the character sheet, like deeds. If you're not, deeds obviously give you experience, but if you're not following what your character wants to do, why are you there? So pay attention to what your characters, even if you don't ask them, even if it's just checking their character sheet for, sorry, there's someone running outside, for what their deeds are, for what they're implying they want to do, even if it's their titles, going back to Scion, their titles will tell you what they want to do. It might not be obvious, it might take some parsing, some thinking, but listen to what they're telling you. And that'll make the game better. Again, I can't stress this enough, different strokes for different folks. This all works really well for me. I hope that some of it is at least interesting and thought-provoking for you. If you don't like any of it, again, more power to you. It's your table, it's your gameplay style. If you enjoy it, I'm not going to tell you that your fun is wrong, because your fun is not wrong if it's fun for you. Obviously, if it's to the detriment of others, you might be doing something wrong, but at the end of the day, I'm just trying to provide context for what I'm going to be writing. And a lot of what I'm going to be writing, I'll be talking about these points over and over again, so I felt like we needed a good understanding of what I was talking about, and I didn't expect it to take this long. So, sorry, not sorry, we're all on the same page, which is an important point. And then so you've got the sheets, you've got the deeds, you've got the aspirations, you've got the milestones, whatever. And you're still not sure what the players want to do. Just ask them. Honestly, they'll tell you. They might not understand what you're trying to get at first, whether through inexperience or not naturally having that gameplay style. So one of my friends who I occasionally GM for, because he's busy, I'm busy, turns up at the events at the cafe. He doesn't, like, he panics if you put him on the spot. And like, that's fine. A lot of people do. Improv is something that takes a while to get used to. And even now, like, I've been doing this stream for an hour and 40 minutes. The first time I did this kind of stream on my channel, it was an hour long, and I was just gone by the end of it. I was mentally drained. Obviously, that's truism for any kind of performance, and let's face it, Twitch is a platform for performance. This is more just a chatting stream than gameplay, but it's that kind of thing. You will get better at it. You'll get better at improv if you want to. Like, going back to the point in chat about being anxious by being put in the hot seat, there are tips and tricks, sure, that can help with that. But if you don't, I don't want to sound condescending, but you're not going to get better if you don't want to get better. Do find the Aspirations needs to be on the best editions story path recommended across the board. Use them for Scarred Lands with my blessing. They can really fit in the system. Truism is a great word. I like words in the Deflector. Excellent. If I do run any Scarred Lands, which I want to, I will totally do so. But just improv is one of those skills where it doesn't seem useful on the surface. You're like, yeah, I can make decisions. What of it? I can say things that seem vaguely in character. And yeah, everyone can do that to some extent, but doing that and then doing it comfortably are two completely different things. This player, he panics, as I said, when put on the spot. So his question, because he was in the... So for context, so the campaign... Hi, Sithel. The campaign where the church was worshipping Cthulhu. I run a 6-week campaign. That was the third iteration. The second iteration, my friend was on it, and he asked who the city worshipped, because it hadn't come up in play. No one was playing a cleric or a paladin, so faith wasn't such a big deal up until that point. So I turned the question back on him, and I went, I don't know, who do they worship? And he panicked to the extent that we had that who do they worship, I don't know, who do they worship, back and forth about 3 times before he felt confident enough to make a decision. And I guess... I don't know where I read it. Nope, I can't bother to think about it. But one of the earliest kind of things I read for role-playing advice was about character voices. And it was, don't be afraid to do a silly voice, because everyone else at the table is probably terrified of doing the same thing. And it's true. I'm not terribly good at voices. If I ever end up being on a Twitch game, who knows, either player or GM, you'll find out I'm not terribly good at doing voices. I can do accents, and I can do word choice and word pattern and things like that, but I can't do voices. I can't alter my pitch very well. You'll notice I don't inflect much, and so that kind of kept me back internally. And then it's just kind of that realization that, yeah, I'm terrified of doing it, but everyone else probably is as well. I've nothing to lose by trying, and that's really the core of improvisation, is you've got nothing to lose by trying. You're making it up. There's really nothing you can make up that's wrong, unless, it is in poor taste, worsens people's fun. Yes, Neon Deflect, confidence in public speaking is from practice. I'm lucky in that I'm one of those introverts who loves public speaking and performing. I like being on stage. It's terrifying in the lead up, and afterwards, I don't know how people feel about mental health and whatnot, or if anyone indeed suffers from mental health problems. To me, it always feels like waves of static crashing around my skull, like making really loud white noise. Someone I've spoken to on my stream on someone else's stream. Sorry, they called it brain bees. As just a buzz in their head. I experienced that after streaming or role playing. I guess it's just the constant stimulus. But knowing that player, definite post game crash. Yeah. Oh man, I can feel that crash coming. Believe you me. Knowing that player wasn't comfortable with improv meant I could step back from directing questions like that to him. And again, that's what the whole point of the dialogue is for. It's to keep people on the same page. It's to keep people comfortable. Make sure everyone's having fun. If you don't have a game system that supports aspirations or deeds, just give them an index card and just ask them to write down something that is true about their character that will never change, something that they want to change, something that their character wants to change about them, and some important information from either their backstory or something they'd like to see up in game. Straight up depression at times, just serotonin burnout. It probably just is. I kind of danced on the borderline of depression a lot anyway. Just mental health, woo. But I do find the role playing helps with that, as a lot of my friends find it helps with as well. But it is probably just the serotonin and all the endorphins. Just like, yeah, we're done making you feel good. Feel terrible. But it is nice to know I'm not alone. My partner doesn't really get the same feeling, so I don't really have discussions like this with anyone else, because the game that I play is over Skype, and they're all in Cardiff, and I'm not in Cardiff, so I don't have that discussion. Right, well, before I get into the final point of running ideas past people, I've noticed the time. So here's your sneak peek of next time. It is simply a blank document called A Rude Awakening. There's your sneak peek. Going back to general tips. So that's the title that we'll be working with. It will be for Scion. It will be for an Origin Chronicle. Sometimes find people are better with characters in other players specifically or certain. So encourage them by setting up longer scenes like that. Definitely. Having that balance of scene length to encourage that kind of thing is incredibly important. Last night's game. So last night was the end of we'll say a parallel quest. The primary party suffered a setback, and the secondary party had to be introduced to solve said setback. But we ran out of time because I needed a long scene, and we couldn't finish it. And I just feel so bad that we couldn't finish it because we were doing some great development. Nice polar bear dancing in the snowstorm you had there in the preview. I am clueless. I'm sorry. So having a balance of scenes to encourage certain things, definitely important. So you get general tips and more specific tips. So running ideas past other people. Just white, dumb joke. No, I get you. I'm sorry. I've been on edge for 2 hours at this point. I mean, technically, if it's a polar bear dancing in a snowstorm. Nope. I'm gonna go with a dumb joke, and everyone's gonna hate me. There's no brushes in Google Docs. Crud. There you go. There's its nose. Now it's a polar bear. That's a stupid joke. Running ideas past other people. Very important. Obviously, this includes your players. Again, you'll be sick of me saying this by now, but actually I haven't said it yet. Your players are your single most valuable resource. Thank you, Neon Deflector. I hope I'm doing well. Your players are your single most valuable and invaluable, they mean the same thing, resource. They will tell you what they're enjoying. They will tell you what they're not enjoying. Heck, just reading body language. I'm not the world's greatest person at reading body language, for reasons I won't get into. But even I can tell when someone's bored. I can tell when someone's not engaging with the game. And I come from a place where, as a player, I used to be very passive. I would not initiate conversation. I would sit in the corner, and if no one spoke to me, I would say nothing all night. I would roll dice when told to. I would, call out random numbers related to the die roll, but I wouldn't engage. I wouldn't interact that much. So I know what that looks like compared to someone who's genuinely not engaging with the game. And if someone's not engaging with the game, most of the time it's because they're not enjoying what they're doing. So if you've got an idea, you're not sure how your players are going to feel about it, run it past them. I ran the Betrayal at the House on the Hill idea past my players. They thought it would be cool. Last night, I wanted to use the zombie T-Rex encounter from the Tomb of Annihilation D&D campaign. I ran it past them. We had... it was 9 o'clock. Cafe closes at 10, so we had an hour. D&D combat, if you don't know, it takes so long. They said, sure. 10 minutes later, they'd beaten the T-Rex because, oh my god, they had done their work to do that. Those were big numbers. They were yelling at me. Anyway, almost only play internet via text. Only that was pretty over for me, though it makes reading by language hard. Yes, I've done some small amount of play by post. Obviously, that has its own pros and cons. But at least with playing by post, when people are engaged with the game because they are posting. I've also done text-based IM gaming. And again, it has its pros and cons, but you still know if people are engaged because they're typing. You can probably tell how engaged they are by the length of their responses in some circumstances. But because it requires a more active engagement, shall we say, you can generally tell if they are engaged. Can I go ahead around play by post? It kind of only works for certain games. I have done D&D by post. It suffers, I'll tell you that much. Power by the Apocalypse games work quite well by post because they're narrative driven. You want to get your head around playing games by post. Play card games by post. Good lord, that was a lot of mental headspace I had to reserve for that. Yeah, run your ideas past your players. If you're concerned, I should say, don't spoil anything for them. But if you're concerned that they won't enjoy something, run the idea past them. Obviously, it's not going to be such a big deal in further streams of these because I'll be writing the stuff and you'll be, in theory, running it. Yeah, I preferred IM to PvP. Hopefully you'll be using the material. If not, hopefully you'll be learning something from my thought processes at least. But players aside, if you don't want to spoil anything for them, if you don't want to, or if you can't, playing by post or IM, if you can't run anything by them, there's the internet of people, social media, Twitch platforms like this one. Please do come subscribe, talk to us. We like you. There's a whole internet of people out there who have their own ideas and experiences to draw upon. If you think you've got a cool idea, find someone who at least knows something about what you're trying to say and talk to them about it. I'm incredibly fortunate in that in my friend group, I have one other person who plays Onyx Path games. So we talk a lot about just bouncing ideas off of each other. Obviously, I'm even more fortunate now that there's this whole Twitch thing going on right now, and I can talk to chat. And presumably by being here, obviously the mods are somewhat involved, but non-mods, presumably by being here, you like Onyx Path games. Personal note, there's something collaborative art and theatre that really entwines with the group and get bogged down, so you have to be able to take session off or create breaks by breaking new situations. Exactly, Neon Deflector. After we resolve this current story beat, I'm going to ask the players if I can have a week or two off, just so that we can get something new injected into the game. One of my players wants to run a one-shot, and we can get a new perspective on things. I can relax. Hi, Sia Edger. Unfortunately, we're running to the end of the stream, but hello, be welcome. It will be on VOD, and It'll be up on YouTube next week. Yeah, having that second, third, fourth, however many pairs of eyes on a project, really, I'm sorry. Every 2 weeks, though, you can watch my face and listen to my voice. Also, that skeleton tipping a hat is amazing. Obviously, there is a point at which too many cooks spoil the broth, as the too many cooks spoil the broth, too many hands spoil the broth, whatever the idiom is. Where there are too many ideas being circulated, and part of the knack of GMing is to be able to figure out when that point is, I guess. But having other people look at what you write and provide feedback is simultaneously terrifying and extremely helpful. So, an example, because, time is getting on, I've got a few minutes left, and it'll kind of tell you all not what I expect of you, but where I hope this whole thing goes next time. So I used to do this. More importantly, terrifying. It is so terrifying. Oh god. So I used to do this on my own channel. It's Comrade Bubbles. The Twitter handle and the Twitch channel are the same name. That's why it's below the webcam. I used to do it on there, as I said earlier, for my D&D game. I used to stream every Monday before my game, like an hour and a half, 2 hours of prep. It wasn't always prep for my game. Sometimes it was just tips like this has been. But it was made because, one, community is incredibly important to me, and two, there's so many videos out there and articles, blog posts, just whole websites dedicated to the theory of GMing, but not many on the practice. And some of that is just the nature of the medium. Some of that is just like, it's a video, you watch it for advice, and that's fine. I can't be the only one who's had this idea. I've never actually looked for anyone else who's doing this kind of thing, so I don't imagine that I am. My ego is not that big. But doing it on stream, I was hashing out ideas with my chat, and they were making me look at things that I'd never even considered, making me look at things in new ways, just new ideas that were better than anything I'd come up with. So really, that's kind of what this is all about. It's been 2 hours of me explaining the general basics of how I approach role-playing. I'm sorry it took so long. I thought maybe it'd go for an hour, but live and learn. There were a lot of stories in there to explain where I'm coming from. Game running is really difficult stuff, especially there's no resource in my native language. Yes, accessibility is a problem. Obviously, it depends on the game you're playing, but I have non-native English-speaking friends who find it a problem as well. It is hard to teach people just by telling, and that's what this whole thing is about. So if you like the concept and you are free, at the time, fortnightly Tuesdays, I'll give the times. I think it's 9 a.m. EDT, I believe, 2 p.m. BST. Obviously, that will change when the time zones change, and I need to figure that out for my calendar. But I'll be going through content generation, and I'll be doing scene outlines and NPC ideas and walking you through how to create antagonists and stuff like that. And hopefully, together, because it's not a vacuum, chat is there. I will be paying attention to it. That's what I've been looking at a lot off screen. My second monitor is here. Making content together. So I'll be talking you through my thought processes, which is what this whole thing was designed to explain. Because you need to know where I'm coming from in order to understand why I think the way I do, I guess. To explain my thought processes, to explain how someone who's been playing role-playing games for a while approaches writing games. Not games, content. I mean, I do write games as well, but they're tiny pet projects. Content. And then with your help, great and wonderful Twitch chat, we'll make something better than I could make myself. If you kind of wanna, I get paid to use words for a living, and I speak real good. Thank you, Yokius. Thank you for saying you enjoyed the stream. I hope you can catch it too. If you want to see more of this material, it is my previous attempts are on YouTube. Again, Comrade Bubbles. That's just the behind the screen playlist. Again, it is focused on D&D. It is rough to start with. I was using Notepad, and then I gradually moved over to Google Docs once I figured out that I could apply filters to the window capture to not show all my shortcuts and tabs and email address and whatnot. And if you want to talk shop, because it was insisted that I promote myself, and I remember wording like that. If you want to talk shop or have any more questions, I do stream. It's Comrade Bubbles. I stream gameplay, mostly. I haven't done a chatting stream yet. It's probably going to happen eventually. But I stream most days of the week. Unfortunately, it is all BST, and then it'll be GMT next month, at the end of next month, obviously, when time zones change. You are English. Yeah, I can see that looking in a lot of ways. So if you're in my time zone, I usually stream between 1 and 4. Thank you, Plastic Cage Plays. I'll tweet when the VOD goes up on YouTube. So obviously if you check the hashtag behind the screen or anything like that, you'll find out when it goes live. But I think that's all I have to say, really. So next time, assuming I can do maths correctly, it'll be the 17th of September, I think. Yeah, I have a friend who did part-time translation work, and he drew the same conclusion. There wasn't really any returns in it. Yeah, I think it'll be the 17th. What are maths? I use words, not numbers. Although, yeah, pretty good at numbers. That'll be the next one, where we will start a rude awakening, which is what I've decided to call. Excellent! I can do basic mathematics. It's what I've decided to call the Origin Chronicle, just so that we're kind of on the same page about the whole thing. Some people here think D&D is a whole hobby and trying to show people there are lots. Oh, there are so many different games that aren't D&D. Good lord. That is the problem I have with Onyx Path games. It's like, if it's not D&D, people here either aren't interested or they're too busy to play anything but D&D. Because the cafe has a community, a role-playing community, but they do a West March style D&D game. Anyway, that's a different game. My plan is to have at least two storylines, two story arcs in a Rude Awakening before moving on to Hero Tier. And then who knows how many will be in the Hero Tier one. So between now and then, as I say, I'll try and get the VOD up next Tuesday, because that's 7 days. And then I will try and create the seed and the pitch for a Rude Awakening. If anyone wants to start thinking of ideas now, the only thing I've settled on as a definite is that there will be a Scion of Inari, which, you know, I don't speak Japanese. I have a very limited grasp of how to pronounce Japanese words, so that's going to be fun and not embarrassing in the slightest. Scion of Inari, and I want to have at least 5 pre-gens with an introductory scene for each. The conceit behind the name of Rude Awakening is that they're people who haven't even had the slightest inclination that they are Scions. So it'll be a very Rude Awakening to that whole world. Personally, not a D&D that much, it is okay, but there are many other themes I think is more interesting to explore in systems that are more well designed. The only reason I'm playing D&D is because the cafe was looking for a DM, and I had nothing else to do, and I wanted to play role-playing games. Trying to host as much as you can actually want to raid, but streaming time differences is kind of an issue. Oh god, time differences are so bad. Right, anyway. I think that's all I've got to say, unless anyone can think of anything they wanted me to answer to wrap up. If not, I will just have to wrap up. I'm terrible at wrapping streams up. But I will be moving over onto my own stream for about an hour if anyone wants to hang out and just talk about stuff. I want to leave, but I can't. They just keep pulling me back in by posting. So while the delay obviously catches up, read a lot, read more, read even more. Don't be afraid to steal what you read. Yes, there is always someone who wants to play it because it's so popular. I just want to play horror games again. Oh, that also reminds me I need to sort out those events. Anyway. So, is there anything I can answer for anyone before I hit stop stream? I will say now, thank you for being here, obviously. Thank you for chatting. Thank you again for the gifted sub. I will not abuse my heart emote because I like to give everyone hearts because it makes people feel good. And I hope that it's been enjoyable. If you do have feedback, please do email me. Plastic Cage Plays. Thank you for the platform. And again, I'll be hanging out in my chat on my channel for a short while after this. But I guess that's it. So, assuming I do everything correctly, I'll try and figure out the chat problem for next time. But thank you, everyone, for being here. And I do hope you come by next time. And if you think you know anyone who might be interested in this kind of thing, point them this way. I hope that there's something you can learn in the 2 and a bit hours I've been yammering on at you. But until next time, obviously feedback is appreciated, but until next time, have a good one. I'm going to press the right shortcut now. Watch.